Welcome back to AWANI. The EPF's 2023 performance results reported a positive growth in member registrations in line with the continued strengthening of the Malaysian labour market. And the active member base remained constant at 53% to 47% of active to inactive member ratio as at December 2023, derived from the ratio of active members of 8.52 million against the total number of members at 16.07 million. However, three key challenges have been identified by EPF. First, inadequate savings accumulation will exacerbate old age income insecurity. Second, majority of adults in labour force not covered for retirement scheme. And the third one is the mismatch between full withdrawal age with national minimum retirement age amidst longer life expectancy. So to discuss further on this, with me in studio is Wong Wai Ken, Country Manager of StashAway Malaysia. Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for joining me in the studio.
Absolutely.
All right, based on the three challenges that I mentioned earlier, perhaps one thing is on the members' basic savings achievement by age is still low. So what are the strategies or perhaps initiatives that we can overcome this challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think EPF has done what it can to deliver a very solid return. 5.5 compared to last year is higher, and I think that, obviously challenges still remain. You mentioned inadequate savings for those about to retire. And there's a few issues here. There's the coverage issue, i.e. including more people into the scheme. And then the second thing is adequacy, people already in the system and helping them reach a better outcome when they retire. So in terms of including more people into the scheme, I think EPF has done what it can in the last few years. There's the income framework, the voluntary access scheme, and then there's the voluntary framework for voluntary contribution scheme. So it's doing what it can to include people in the informal sector, housewives, for example, entrepreneurs. So there are already these initiatives which are already in work. There's also other things to help members, like the loan on account 2 and also the introduction of account 3. So I think these things are being put into place and will help some of the systemic problems that we talked about earlier. And then the second thing is for people in the scheme who have a mismatch between their what they need for a dignified retirement and also what they currently have. So EPF can do all it can, but ultimately it still comes down to what the contributors themselves can do for themselves, right? And I think earlier on the coverage you mentioned that the assets under management increased for EPF, which is a good thing because it shows signs that people are not taking out money from the COVID windows that allowed people to take out money. And after 2 years of negative growth, now the net contribution is positive again. So people need to do what they can to put themselves in a better position for retirement. And step one is not to remove from your own EPF savings. And the second thing is to maybe think about some voluntary contributions when you can contribute more.
And another concern that we can look at is the amount of statistics, 75%. They took out the money in a lump sum form. So how do we overcome this challenge as well?
Yes, 75% of contributors
It's quite high now.
Is very high, and they take out all their EPF savings within 5 years, right? So that is very concerning. And I think that is something that reflects two things. It reflects firstly that the amount saved is not high to begin with. And the second thing is the awareness to keep the money inside the EPF system and withdraw gradually for your own needs is not there. There's no magic wand because I think, let's say you say from a policy point of view to introduce staged withdrawals would be very unpopular. You've worked all your life and then when you are 50, 55, 60, suddenly EPF says, oh, you can't take it out according to your wants and needs. I think that's going to be very, very unpopular. Yes, exactly. It will cause rage. So I think really it comes down to awareness. Firstly, that if money is still in the EPF system, it can still compound at the 5 to 6% rate. So it's actually in contributors' best interest to keep it in the system for as long as they can. Secondly, coming back to self-reliance, right? EPF can do all it can, but if the contributors themselves have the ability to invest beyond their EPF contributions before they retire and draw from that after they retire, that's very important. And it also means that when you retire, it doesn't mean you stop investing altogether. It means you should still have some money invested either in your EPF or your liquid investments like stocks and funds. and also maybe in property where you're deriving investment income from
That would be
that.
lesser amount, is it?
It depends on your portfolio, right? So all I'm saying is that EPF alone cannot be the solution for your retirement. And if people are taking it all out of EPF all at once within 5 years, they put themselves in a worse off position. And at that point, it's very hard for anyone to really lend them a hand.
So for now, for quick win policy, what are the best strategies?
I think there are unfortunately no quick wins, right? I think these policies that involve retirement schemes need to be thought out. There needs to be consultation. There needs to be awareness. There needs to be a real drive towards people really understanding the root cause. Incentives here and there, which already have been introduced, things like, let's say, the voluntary framework, the government incentives of 500 ringgit a year, they help you get on the right path, right? So those maybe are quick wins. But real long-term change will need to be thought of more carefully, and it also comes down to the contributor themselves.
Another thing we want to look at is how does the EPF's active participation in a domestic equity market can actually contribute to long-term or long value creation for its members?
Yeah, that's important. I think EPF has reminded us that it's a very large player, right? They have 700 billion invested in the local market. 22% of that is in equities, and 68%, almost 70% is in bonds. So that is a very timely reminder because the local capital markets rely on the EPF for liquidity and also to take up new issuances. You mentioned the equity market, but I want to focus on the fixed income market first because that's a really important asset allocation move by the EPF because investing in bonds, obviously a more safer asset class, helps you preserve capital. So if 70% of what they've invested locally is in bonds, it means that contributors are well taken off in terms of capital preservation and dividend income, interest income from these bonds, so that they are set up for a good return ultimately in the end of the year.
All right. When it comes to investments, we can't just rely on EPS, right? We can't just rely on KWSP as well. So maybe on the other hand, we can look at on how does EPFs can play their role in not just foster financial inclusivity, but as well as resilience across the Malaysian society. That's first, and especially when it comes to a program that cater to workers in the informal sector and also formal sector, and as well as when it comes to their retirement savings. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, so EPF mandate is very specific. It only caters to people who have an income, and people in the formal sector. 40% of Malaysians are still not covered. So that means people in the informal sector and people that are unemployed, people like housewives or if they can't find work. So increasing coverage is one of EPF's key initiatives, and to do that, they really need to look at the issue themselves. The Malaysian economy is changing and it's dynamic. So the informal sector is also growing. Gig workers and the gig economy is growing. So recognizing these golongan, this demographic as people that have income insecurity and maybe moving forward retirement insecurity is really important. So working with the providers, like Grab and all that, to make sure that their workers are well taken care of and not treated just like contractors that are freelance is very important. And to also raise awareness amongst gig workers and people in the digital economy that they also need to take care of their own retirement. You can contribute, and you can also contribute up to a higher amount now. So that's very important. And I think that if they go through these changes, that ultimately the inclusion will mean that these people in the informal sector will also have better behavior, because once you're in the system and you see returns 5-6% every year, you will continue to do so until your retirement.
So we mentioned about the amount of people that's taken out their investments in a lump sum form, and then we have a low investment percentage, and also we have another problem is the awareness. That's also the people that hasn't invested yet. So what are other challenges that you see in this sector?
I think there's obviously investment risk. I think the EPF is a very large fund. It's a professional manager which has a very well-designed scheme. But ultimately, to deliver 5 to 6% returns is a challenge. I think setting up your pension fund, which is obviously very large, 1.1 trillion, is of national importance. I don't think I'm overstating that it's of national importance. So if you look at the way that EPF has invested, what they call their strategic asset allocation, that tells us that our money is well managed and is in good hands. So they provided information through their press release that said that their fixed income or the bonds or the safer side of things is around 60% of their portfolio, which includes bonds, real estate, and infrastructure. So that part is safe. That's for capital preservation. 40% is in equities. And out of that, 38% is invested overseas. And the investment overseas gives you a better investment return because most of it is in equities, firstly. And secondly, the risk return of overseas markets like the US tends to be better. So the EPF needs to navigate very, very difficult environments. Right? Economies are changing, markets are always moving. So I think that's the key thing that EPF needs to focus on top of its policy initiatives that we talked about.
What's your forecast for next year? We've seen quite a significant increment from last year. So what's your forecast for not just next year, but years ahead? Will we ever reach to the highest point, 8%?
Yeah, I think we all grew up thinking about that number, right? But I think we need to be realistic and not just benchmark EPF returns according to what it was last year. We need to look at long-term track record. So the long-term EPF track record is closer to 6%. But I think the more immediate context is how are markets doing? So if we look at how EPF achieved 5.5, markets last year were volatile, even though developed markets like the US performed over 20% because of good tech stocks, good selection in tech stocks. The local and regional markets were down 2%. So I think that two different environments show that 5.5 is actually a very decent return. I think moving forward, EPF shouldn't look to change its strategic asset allocation, but maintain it and look for opportunities here and abroad. So they can deliver good, stable returns. After all, their mandate is to deliver 2% real returns, i.e. after inflation. So in terms of forecasts, I think it will become, it will end up between 5 and 6%, the highest it's ever reached. Historically, if I'm not mistaken, was at least in the last 10 years, was 6.9% in 2017. And the lowest it's ever been is last year, 5.35% in the last 10 years. So it will be in that range, and I don't think EPF should deviate too much because ultimately it's managing the money for our retirement, and long-term goals don't need any adjustments in the medium term. So they stay the course.